As a Christian working woman, you have many roles, from your responsibility with family and friends to community and work. How do you connect all that you do with all that you are and still have your faith shine through? It's a challenge, but you are up to it. The She Works for Him podcast is the gathering place to empower Christian working women to live out their calling at work by connecting them to God, resources, and each other through powerful faith stories from other working sisters in Christ. Welcome to She Works for Him.
You've tuned into She Works for Him, where we connect Christian working women to God, resources, and to one another. We are your hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Catherine Gates, and you can find us online at sheworksforhim.com. That's sheworks4him.com, and on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where you can actually watch the interviews that we are conducting with these very precious women. So thank you so much for being here, and let's get on to the show.
You know, Martha, women frequently experience the tension of navigating career and family. Mom guilt is something most women struggle with in varying degrees to start with, right? But working outside the home only complicates and exacerbates the issue. Is it possible for a woman to find peace and thrive while raising children and engaging in a successful career? Heidi Lewerenz has discovered the answer is yes. It took some soul searching, creativity, and lots of prayer. As the mother of 7 children and a high-achieving woman, Heidi had put a great deal of energy into ensuring her professional life didn't intersect with her mom life. That approach left her drained, conflicted, and never feeling fully present in either area. When she discovered that God designed her to do both and do them alongside each other while bringing her faith into all of it, she found a new way of living that gave her more confidence, peace, and freedom. Heidi, welcome to She Works for Him.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited to get into this conversation. But before we dive into talking about how you live out your faith at work and what that looks like for you, could you share a little bit about how you became a follower of Jesus Christ?
Sure. Yeah. So my story is one of those that is rather simple. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, but I was introduced as a child by my family and was really raised to know the Word of God and love the Word of God and study it. And I saw my parents living out their faith at work, at home, in the community. And so, you know, that was a gift. That was how it started. And then I think, like a lot of people, as we grow, we have to own things that, you know, was I just a believer because I was raised in it, or do I really believe this? So in college, I had a whole nother time of commitment, really tested my faith. I studied a lot of different world religions, but I came back to Christianity largely because, well, I mean, I know the Lord was involved in that, but in my mind, it was because there's hope in Christianity outside of things that I do. And all these other world religions, we're still dependent on my own efforts. So, and because it had so much historical evidence for truth. So I kind of had those two defining faith moments.
It gives you such an appreciation, though, for other people's perspective, but then also a deeper commitment to your own faith, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when you go into the depths of kind of despair and where everything is rocked and I pieced it back together. I mean, I had to really own that journey. And so, and just have so much respect for everyone else who is on those journeys.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your work. What does it look like? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I get to coach leaders. Most of them right now are ambitious Christian women who are doing business and family at the same time. And I'm also a trainer. So a lot of them have teams in their companies or their organizations, and I get to come in and train. I'm a certified strength coach, instructor. So yeah, it's such life-giving work. I just love being able to come alongside people in their own journeys of success at work and success at home.
You know, and Heidi, we are not shy here about letting people know how they can find you. As we have this conversation and talk about your day-to-day work that you were just explaining, as well as this journey that God has had you on, how can people connect with you? Because I don't want them to miss that opportunity. And your name's just a little bit challenging to spell. So
Right.
we will have that in the show notes as well. But why don't you just let people know right now where they can connect with you best?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a website, HeidiLewerenz.com, and it just talks about the coaching and training and then any other classes or programs that I'm offering. And there is a free resource about how to choose calm over crazy that you can download there as well. And then I am present on Facebook and Instagram under that same name. So
excellent. Yeah, Lewerenz is Lewerenz for those listening and who have a chance to jot it down.
Yes, Thank you, Catherine. Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea. I think it will get a lot of us curious just about the free download about calm over crazy, because who doesn't want that, especially as we are looking at a new year and what God has ahead for us, and praying into having more calm over crazy is an awesome thing. So let's talk for a moment there about what your biggest struggle is as a Christian working woman. What is that thing that is a big struggle for you right now?
Well, I think it is partly the crazy. And it's also what Catherine alluded to, just the guilt sometimes that can creep in, like I'm not showing up fully present enough for my children or fully present enough for my clients. And then even if I am being fully present for everybody else, I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not taking care of the temple God has given me. And so I think that is just always living on the edge of my capacity, which I think a lot of high achieving women do. It's a beautiful place to be when it's the sweet spot. But when we go like just a little bit over the edge, that's where it gets really chaotic and crazy. And it feels like, we're really not doing anything we care about.
You just said something very amazing. I wrote it down here, living on the edge of capacity. And I can imagine that a lot of people listening right now can finally put some words to what they might be feeling, because I think a lot of us experience that. And yet we know that is not a healthy place to be. So we're going to dig into some really exciting stuff in the next segment. But can you just tell me real quick, at what point in your life did you realize that God cared all about your work at home and in your professional life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, my story is more about how I realized God created me with an identity that thrived in both work and family and community and friends. So it was more about that realization of, wow, God's designed me to show up the same way with these gifts and with my faith in all these different areas.
So how did that happen? Was there, were you struggling with that and then realized that God really wanted that to all have more unison around it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like I kept compartmentalizing my work, just like Catherine said, this professional Heidi and the home Heidi and the wife Heidi and the friend Heidi. And I felt like that was the best way to show up and not let these things all cross over each other. But what was starting to happen is some of them were getting really full, some of those roles and responsibilities, and were getting too heavy. And I just wanted to quit some or all of them. And, I think what God was really speaking to me, he was asking me why do you think I gave you this ambition? Why do you think I created you to multitask? Why do you think that you are driven? Is it just for the professional life? And I always thought that's what it was for, because that's the only place I really saw it lived out. And so what he really did for me was turn and look at me and say, Heidi, I've created you to be that way as a mom. I've created you to be that way as a wife. So he integrated the things he was calling me to, he integrated into my design and just really said, you are creating idol out of career and an idol out of motherhood. And the reason why you're so crazy is because you can't serve both of them.
And when we come back, we're going to talk more about that crazy and what God showed you to do next. You've been listening to She Works for Him with your co-hosts, Catherine Gates and Martha Brangenberg, and we'll be right back.
Did you know that God has a calling on your life? It's true. He's called you to bring Jesus to the world. For some, that may look like a pulpit or a foreign mission field, but for most of us, it looks like a construction site, a cubicle, a hospital, or a classroom. Wherever it is that you work, live, volunteer, and invest, That is your mission field. To learn more about integrating your faith into your work and retirement, check out our books, I Work for Him, She Works for Him, and I Retire for Him, by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore.
Welcome back to She Works for Him with your hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Catherine Gates. We're talking to Heidi Lewerenz today. Heidi, you were talking about that craziness that can come when you are splitting and trying to be those two people, and how God showed you that motherhood and your career were becoming idols. So how did you make that shift from struggling with the tensions between those roles to finding more peace and freedom?
Yeah, well, that has been the journey that I'm still on. I feel like, we have to walk it out every day, but definitely 15 years ago when that happened, it was just a revelation. It happened through a leadership course I was in, and it was, we were learning about our design and how to align our time. And I thought I just needed to figure out my priorities more or just get better at time management. But in reality, God was really just calling me to kind of integrate my heart. And so these idols of career and motherhood, I was staking my identity on them. I was either career woman or I was mom. And I would, I'd fight internally. That's where the guilt came. And God was like, Heidi, Christ is supposed to be your identity. Your identity is supposed to be on Christ. Like, you are my daughter. So why are you picking these other things? And that's partly why you're having so much internal conflict and so much guilt. So when I could say, stop compartmentalizing and instead integrate this idea that I was designed to do both of these, and they can kind of bump into each other. They can interact. My clients in my small business can know that I office at home and I have children. My children can know that I go to work. And I know a lot of people do have those things bump into each other in a natural way, but in my heart, I just wouldn't let them.
That's amazing. I think that's really speaking to a lot of people right now. I can't tell you how many times I've heard women say, when I realized I didn't have to be a different person at work and a different person at home, when I realized I could bring my whole self into everything, it just, literally tears, right, would come. There would be so much freedom in that. And it sounds like, well, we need to think about that in terms of motherhood, not just home, right? But the motherhood as well. That's amazing. So can you share some practical tips with our listeners? Are there, what would that look like, practically speaking? What are some things that people can do? Maybe a little of it is a mindset shift, but what are some things that people could do to help them make that integration happen?
Well, great question. Again, I think part of it is, okay, so for me at that time, and this may not be for everybody, but I started looking at corporate, and I was in a nonprofit, but it was big and it was global and it felt corporate. And so that environment did not allow me the flexibility that I was desiring to integrate. So for me, 15 years ago, one step was to say, what would it look like to be a professional and a mom and have more autonomy about how I interact in both of those? So that was one thing. And so I started looking at, having my own business, freelancing, being a contractor versus being full-time somewhere. And that God honored that and blessed that. And that's been a huge piece, I think, of me being able to integrate on my terms or on the terms that my husband and I, or that the Lord and I pray through and figure out what that looks like for each season. The second thing I think is the internal dialogue about being a high capacity, high achieving woman and not belonging in motherhood. I think there's some rhetoric, at least for me, that felt like, all the good moms I knew weren't wired like me. And it's just a lie. It's a lie of the enemy, because God designed us all uniquely. And if we have the gift of fertility or the gift of nurturing through adoption or fostering, like, God has gifted us with the capacity or the skills for both. And so I was holding back all of the stuff that was super driven, super ambitious, that was like strategic planning for the company. Instead of, God was like, well, what if you did that for your family? What if you and your husband talked about values at home? What if you thought about your children as people you're investing in, like you do your team? What if you had goals at home? What if, you use some of the structure and the things that work at the office in your home?
Yeah.
And then I could show up the same. Sorry, go ahead, Martha.
No, I'm really excited to hear that, because those are some great examples that probably I know for myself, I've never thought in terms of that. So what were the results? Like if you started to take some of that and apply it in your home, what did you see happening?
Wow. Well, first of all, I felt more alive. I felt more like, wow, I could maybe do this. There was much more positive energy and positive thinking, because I got to show up how I was designed. Secondly, the relationship with my husband grew because we were all of a sudden like co-owners, partners, and we were having these deeper conversations about vision and mission and the things that we were getting to do with our family versus that other mindset of like your kids hold you back. Well, when they finally get to this stage, we'll get to do this or that, but it was truly integrating the life we were living with the vision God had for our family. And it brought us closer together.
And that is such a wonderful example to your children. Like they get to learn from you, watching you, and that's going to prepare them. I mean, some of the stories I have heard from women leaders who have really been successful are those stories where where they were working in their parents' business at 12 years old and getting to support the business and then learning what it took to run a business so that when it came time for them to decide what they wanted to do for work, it wasn't so overwhelming, right? I mean, yes. What a gift your children are getting.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I mean, there are definitely crazy days where they might say, I am never doing both of those things at the same time. But, it's that way either way. If I was working full-time somewhere else and they didn't really know what I was doing, they maybe would have opinions about that as well. But yeah, the hope is that they would see us integrating the calling on our lives with our faith as the container. So this idea that like my career doesn't hold who I am and my motherhood doesn't hold who I am, but Christ holds who I am.
That's right.
Did you ever have that conversation with your family as God was revealing that to you? Was there a way that you were able to articulate to your kids so that they don't have that same, crisis of crazy or whatever you want to call it?
I like that.
That I think I'm starting to more now because my oldest is now 18. And so when I had this sort of discovery and, connected with my husband through this, that was 15 years ago. So he was 3 or 4. And we had 4 children at the time, and they weren't old enough to really, understand what was happening. But I think as they've gotten older, I guess I've seen some of the fruit where they see me as someone who is doing something that God has called me to do, and loving them and raising them as part of it, but it's not all of it. And they don't also have their, the flip side where like I'm gone so much and that that hurts my heart because I know that I want to be present for them. And then they think that that's what my calling is and that they're just sort of an accessory. So I guess right now I've heard them say things that show me some of that fruit, but I don't know. I hope to have some conversations.
Well, it sounds like, though, that because they were so young, and I guess I didn't have that context to begin with, you didn't really need to change their paradigm. You've lived it out as the natural in your home. And so they've seen it by example, and we can only pray that future generations will see that as well. So we're going to come back in just a little bit, and we're going to wrap up this conversation. I know that it's been intriguing. And I hope that if you just tuned in, that you can go back and listen to the whole show and hear what we're talking about today with Heidi Lewerenz. And you can find Heidi, it's HeidiLewerenz.com, right?
That's correct.
Excellent. Yes. We'll have that in the show notes. We'll be right back with She Works for Him. As women, we like to share our special finds with others. That new little shop we just discovered or a favorite brand that is having a sale. Well, I have a special find for you. The Awaken Podcast Network is a collection of podcasts gathered onto a digital platform with you in mind. No more searching and wondering if the content is relevant. The work has already been done. Awaken Podcast Network even has smaller collections of podcasts focused on specific topics, including a collection called She Works for Him, dedicated to content for Christian working women. So go ahead, unlock God's purpose for your work, and check out awakenpodcastnetwork.com. Welcome back to She Works for Him with your hosts Martha Brangenberg and Catherine Gates. Today we are talking with Heidi Lewerenz, and you can find her at HeidiLewerenz.com, and we have that spelling in the show notes. And one of the things I want to remind you is you can go to that website and you can download the Calm Over Crazy. What a great, intriguing title for something to help us in this new year to really reset and think about having calm over crazy. Heidi, as we talk about how God really showed you that tension between motherhood and your career and how there wasn't to be that tension, that your heart can be integrated in both of those areas. I'm curious if you have a place that you call your community that really is feeding into this conversation. Is there a place like that for you?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I feel like that's been what this last decade has been about. Like when God called me into that thinking, it was kind of trying to find my tribe. And so in many ways, one of my heartbeats is to help create that kind of community, through the work that I get to do, but in living the integrated life. But I think too, it's happened because of intentional, reaching out to other women that I know who are trying, maybe they have gone to part-time. Like I'm part-time. So I'm not working full-time, I'm part-time. So I have mom friends and work friends, but there are women, all over the country that I've connected with for virtual coffee dates or, even Catherine, just being able to connect with her through another leadership group. And then she's introduced me to some other people. And so that's been a blessing, just more one-on-ones. I can't say that I have a whole tribe yet, but.
Well, and that's one of the great things that She Works for Him really has a heart for, is connecting Christian working women to God, resources, and one another. Yeah. And so who knows, through on our website, sheworksforhim.com, we have a list of all kinds of organizations that are speaking into Christian working women. But you're right, I would guess, I can't guarantee it because I don't know for sure, but we're living in a world where more people have control over how many hours they're working. Am I going to be full-time? Am I going to be part-time? And what does part-time look like for me? And does that give me the flexibility to figure out where my tribe actually is? Catherine, what do you have to say to that?
As far as finding a tribe, certainly Women in the Marketplace, that's what we got started doing, because we heard the same thing you expressed, Heidi. It's so hard to find, there's the working women and they have their networking, but there's no faith element. There's the women who are moms and they meet for 10 o'clock on Tuesday, Bible study, but that doesn't work for someone who's working in their work schedule. And so it's so important that we're able to find, and they're out there, right? Working women who want it to be faith Christ-centered and have conversation about exactly what we're talking about today. How do we do it all and do it well and really guard against that idolatry, if you will, or putting our identity in the wrong places, but really support each other in living out the way God designed us. And so, I just applaud you for the work that you're doing. And I look forward to helping you, to connect with those kinds of women. But Heidi, we're kind of running out of time, and I would love for you, is there one piece of wisdom or one tip or something that you would really love to leave our listeners with today before we wrap up?
Well, the thought that keeps coming to mind, and maybe this is for someone who's listening, is that you get to decide. So this idea that you get to decide. So I think that sometimes when we are struggling with wanting to do something that's in alignment with our values, it feels like there's so many reasons why it can't happen. But God has given us many tools and he's given us wisdom. And if he calls us to do something, he will make a way. So we just have to have the mindset that we have choices and we get to decide, and walking in, prayerfully in what he's called us to. He will walk through it and open doors for us. So, I don't know if that's about going part-time. I don't know if that's about starting another venture. I don't know if that's about having a baby or having another baby. But, if he's calling you to it, he will do it. And so just trusting in that. And then he wants us to live a life of abundance. So silence the idea that you can't be a mom and work full-time and do it well. It might look different, but the abundant life that he calls us to is one that can hold both. So that would be my encouragement.
I love that, Heidi. And I want to just second that. I want to encourage every woman. I know you're choosing part-time, but I think a lot of women, it's just, sometimes it's a matter of like praying, seeking God, and maybe it's having a conversation with your boss to say, this is what would work for me. But there's a lot of ways it could look. And it's just really about, as you said, seeking the Holy Spirit, praying about it, asking God, what do you want it to look like? Instead of assuming, right, what the limitations are, really just being open to God's leading and opening doors. I just love that. Heidi, this has been amazing. I really know that it's going to encourage and inspire a lot of women. So thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today.
Oh, thank you for holding it with such kindness. It's been such a lovely conversation. And that is my prayer. I'm praying for the listeners. I'm praying for you and all the great work you're doing, both of you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to She Works for Him with your hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Catherine Gates. We're Christian working women helping other Christian working women to live out their calling at work as she works for Him.
As Christian women, we have many roles. From daughter, sister, friend, wife, and mother to analyst, accountant, executive, or educator. Is it possible to balance our roles at work and home in a way that honors God? The answer is yes. And our new book, She Works for Him, will help show you how. Written to celebrate, encourage, and equip women in the workforce, She Works for Him discusses the diverse experiences of today's Christian working woman. Pick up a copy by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore. You've been listening to the She Works for Him podcast with your hosts, Catherine Gates, Nadia Dixon, and Martha Brangenberg. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube under She Works for Him. And to access any of the resources we mentioned on today's show, see the show notes at sheworksforhim.com. That's sheworks4him.com. This podcast was created to empower you to live out your calling at work so the world knows she works for Him.